The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is one of the most unique Zelda games so far, ditching many of the franchise's well-known tropes, creating new ones in the process. The most well-known change in Echoes of Wisdom is the focus on puzzle solving over your typical combat, playing as Hyrule's wise princess instead of the usual protagonist, Link. This change worried many at the start, myself included, wondering how the action would vary from the beloved installments of the past. Well, it's safe to say that Echoes of Wisdom did a pretty good job at including this new style of combat. This combat was best utilized during the game's many boss fights. While they're all quite unique, my opinion on these bosses is pretty mixed, thus raising the question, which bosses are the best and which are the worst? In this video, I will be covering all the main bosses from The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and ranking them from worst to best. And yes, I did just say main boss, so any sub-bosses aren't included. For reference, I used this list on Zelda Wiki to properly distinguish which bosses would be included and which were discluded. And of course, Echoes of Wisdom is an experience that will vary for almost every single player. Obviously, this list is based on my experience with each boss, so don't be surprised if our opinions may vary. With all that said, let's find out which Echoes of Wisdom boss is the best. As I just mentioned, this list is based on my individual experience, which I'm almost certain is different from yours depending on what echoes or accessories you use throughout the playthrough. The accessories I always had equipped during my playthrough were the Frog Ring for increased jump height, the Curious Charm for improved defense, and the Firmoo blue light glasses? That's right. It's sponsor time. As someone who sits on their computer literally all day, whether it be making videos or playing video games, I have always been a huge believer in protecting your eyes. Most blue light glasses on the internet feel extremely cheap when it comes to quality. Luckily, I was able to receive a pair of Firmoo blue light glasses and I gotta say, they work like a charm. Not only do they protect my eyes from harmful blue light exposure, but they're also affordable, well-fitting, like seriously, these are not coming off my head, and very, very stylish. I picked out the f65/28 frames in a beautiful matte blue. I don't personally have a prescription, but if you do have one, the Firmoo website has you covered. You're able to customize your glasses down to almost every detail, giving you freedom over your own personal preferences. If you're spending as much time as I am on the computer, I highly recommend checking out their website, which is linked in the description, for a wide variety of affordable frames. And if you do decide to get a pair, be sure to use my promo code RHZN50 in the checkout for 50% off your order. Again, a huge thank you to Firmoo for the partnership. Now, let's continue on with the video. Kicking off the list, we have Tecum. Tecum is essentially the iconic Zelda enemy horde fight before the final boss like we get in Skyward Sword or Tears of the Kingdom, which to be honest is hardly even a boss fight. Though Tecum is a lot different from the other monster horde battles. Tecum will float around the room and summon enemies as a distraction, though the distractions aren't very helpful for them as you can basically avoid them entirely and target the main boss. The music is something I'll continue to mention for almost every boss in this list as this game has a great soundtrack. Of course, that means that this boss fight has a great theme. Still a good fight, but very different from the other bosses, and not in a good way. After you finish exploring the Southhorn ruins, you are tasked with defeating the Seismic Talus, a giant floating rock enemy that has two big hands and a weak point in its core. Haven't seen this one before, like, ever. I think this is the first time that Nintendo's ever done a big guy with two hands and a weak point in the middle, or with the hands. They'd never done that. Being the first dungeon boss in the game, the Seismic Talus is basically everything you'd expect it to be. A really simple and easy fight. Though that's not saying it's a bad fight whatsoever. One thing that stood out to me in this fight is how many different ways there are to defeat it. For example, I had waited for the Talus to attack and then targeted its weak points when it was vulnerable. Others had used the bind ability to tear the weak point away from the body. Truly a perfect example of what makes Echoes of Wisdom so unique. A great way to end off the first dungeon in the game. Echoes of Wisdom has one of the most interesting openings in the entire franchise, the reason for that being the very sudden fight against the Prince of Darkness himself, Ganon. This is the first time in The Legend of Zelda that a game starts off with a boss fight, and not just any boss fight, it's against the franchise's main antagonist. This duel is a very obvious callback to A Link to the Past or A Link Between Worlds. Having to dodge his trident attacks and rally the magic balls was very reminiscent of the previous games. I also really like how you play as Link during this fight. With Zelda being this game's main character, it's really nice that we got at least some action with Link. Though this boss fight is really easy, which is expected as it's quite literally the first thing that you do in the entire game. But man, talk about starting things off with a bang. Though this isn't the only time we do battle with our piggy friend. There's actually a second Ganon fight in this game, that being the boss of the Hyrule Castle dungeon. This fight is practically identical to the first one minus a few very minuscule changes. Though I do prefer this version of Ganon, and that's because we get to play as Princess Zelda. Using your echoes allows for a way more creative fight compared to the first one, and if you prefer to use Link's moveset, you actually can do so by activating the sword mode. The choice is completely up to the player, which is why I placed this fight slightly higher. Though again, it is almost the exact same as the first fight, so it definitely kills some of the creativity points. While on the topic of recurring Zelda bosses, I might as well mention one of the most overdone bosses in the entire franchise, that being Goma. Though this fight is really quite different from the others in the franchise. This fight revolves around these switch things that you have to activate using electricity. This already makes the fight very unique for each player, as you can use many different echoes for the job. I really like this idea for a boss, and I think it was executed really well. Though, like the other Goma fights in the series, this boss is really easy. Basically, the only obstacle in your way are these webs or baby Gomas, which provide almost no risk factor whatsoever. Also, the music in this fight is really good. Vocavore was one of the most surprising bosses in Echoes of Wisdom. I had almost no faith going into this fight. Thankfully, I was pleasantly shocked when I actually enjoyed this boss a lot. Compared to some of the other underwater boss fights, like this guy, he kinda sucks. Vocavore felt like a masterpiece. The biggest difference from this fight and the previous water bosses is how great the swimming controls are in Echoes of Wisdom. It kinda reminds me of Skyward Sword swimming with all the twirlies and stuff, just in a top-down or side-scrolling view. I also really enjoyed using the sword fighter form in this battle. The underwater controls felt really good, and destroying the glowing things on Vocavore's back was really quite satisfying. Despite how fun this boss is, it's also incredibly easy, which I now see as a recurring theme for almost all of these bosses. The attacks were too slow and really easy to avoid with the quick swimming mechanics. Overall, a really fun but easy boss fight. Honestly, I would say that Vocavore and Mogrife are practically neck and neck on my list, meaning that they are pretty interchangeable depending on the mood. But for now, I do have Mogrife on top, and the reason for that is because he is rocking a super sweet pair of shades. The fight starts off quite simple. Dodge his Sandcleave attacks, wait for a charge, and hide behind a statue to stun him. It's not till the second phase where this battle really starts to take off. The arena is changed to feature a lot of quicksand to slow your movements down, making dodging his tornado attacks much more challenging. This phase ramps up the intensity a lot, which is something I really enjoy. I also liked how alert you have to be at all times in this fight. It really keeps you on your toes. The different variety of echoes you can use to knock him down is also a great feature. Though it might not be the most complex duel, it's a really solid early game boss. Whoa, another old Zelda boss brought back for this game. Yay. Joking aside, I really do like the Volvagia boss fight. Obviously, it's really neat that Volvagia made a return for the first time since Ocarina of Time, but the battle in general is also a lot of fun. First of all, there are many different ways you can actually deal with Volvagia. I actually had no clue that you could use the bind ability to yank the green ball off his neck. I had originally just used a flying echo to slowly chip away at it, which is, not my proudest moment. This fight also requires you to move around a lot, as this boss arena is absolutely huge, which is something that I don't love, but it's not enough for me to dislike it. I do think that if they would have cleaned up the arena a little bit, it would have been a lot better, but I'm still fine with what we got. It's also really easy to avoid Volvagia's attacks, which makes this boss pretty easy when you know what you're doing. The pacing is also not great, and this fight felt like it dragged on for a little bit too long. But the long boss fights are also pretty fun, so I'm quite torn for this one. Still a great fight despite all the potential changes. If I had to pick a least favorite thing about Echoes of Wisdom, it would most likely be the main events leading to the ending. The build up for the ending honestly caught me quite off guard with how quickly it was going. I wasn't sure if I was actually progressing to the final boss, and well, it turns out that I was. After making your way through Null's body, you come face to face with, well, Null. And even though this boss places at number 2, I thought it was a bit disappointing. And here's why. This fight is really long, but also really easy. Dying to this boss honestly might just be impossible. You're also just a spectator for a majority of this boss fight. Apart from avoiding Null's attacks, it's your echoes that do the damage to the enemy, which I guess kinda depends on the playstyle and what echoes you use, but most of them are gonna yield to the same results anyway. If you want to use your sword fighter form in this fight, however, you actually can't, because instead of playing as Link, you are playing with Link, and he's just as strong and as awesome and as useless as always? Yeah, unfortunately this AI Link kinda sucks. Despite his stupidity, the idea is really quite cool. I had said before how I both like and dislike this fight for being long as hell, though I do think I like it more than I don't. Null has multiple phases, one being his normal form, the second being his underwater fish version, which is extremely easy, and the final form where Null transforms into previous bosses you've defeated. I really do enjoy the final phase and think it is by far the hardest, rightfully so. As much as I wish this fight was a bit more interactive, I also really like the movement in this game, so dodging the onslaught of attacks is actually pretty fun. Even though it was disappointing, I still really enjoyed this fight, almost my favorite in the game, being overshadowed by only one. Usually if a boss fight pisses me off in any way, I'm automatically gonna hate it. The only exception for that is if I think a boss is really well designed and also quite fun, despite it making me want to rip my hair out. These words are exactly how I would describe my experience with my favorite Echoes of Wisdom boss, Scorchel. Scorchel has one of the most classic ideas for a video game boss, that being the hot and cold. This fight starts off in a nice filled room, requiring the player to use fire echoes to damage Scorchel's helmet while also avoiding the attacks on the slippery ice. After doing so, the arena loses the ice and the helmet becomes red. You then repeat the same process as you just did, now with ice echoes. The final phase of the battle has him flipping back and forth between fire and ice, which requires some pretty quick thinking to figure out which echo is going to be the best while also avoiding his attacks. I absolutely love this concept, and I think it was executed really well. Despite this boss having 3 phases, it doesn't feel like it drags on for longer than it needs to. My personal favorite part of this battle is when the helmet in the room change from fire and ice over and over again. It's a great way of keeping you on your feet and provides quite the challenge. Shockingly, the ice physics in this room aren't nearly as annoying as you'd think they'd be, like certain other Zelda games. I am a big fan of this boss, and I think Nintendo did a great job at executing their idea. Hats off to you, Nintendo. You've done it again. Well, that does it for this video. Thank you to everyone who watched all the way through. I really appreciate it. I also apologize for the big gap in between this video and my previous one. I had a lot of things come up and I couldn't put as much time into this project as I would have liked. Or, I guess I put too much time into it. Or, you know what I mean. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. We are slowly creeping towards 10,000 subscribers, and it would mean the world to me if you guys could help me reach my goal. Thank you to everyone who continues to support my channel. It means so much, you have no idea. Again, a huge thank you to Firmoo for sponsoring this video and sending me a pair of their blue light glasses. I really appreciate it, and it actually helped me a lot when making this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys soon.